Today we're filming in the shop. I was just away for a couple of weeks of mountain biking down in Utah. Got back, really excited to see that we actually have a new bike in that I think is going to be a really important bike for 2025. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the new Giant Talon 1, the 2025 version. This is one of 3 different versions of the Talon available in Canada and the United States. We're looking at, basically this is an entry-level mountain bike. This isn't hardcore, but this is what a lot of people are going to be getting to use for round the town riding and just getting into single track riding. Stick with me. I'm going to be going over all of the specs for this bike, the details. So when you go to actually check this thing out in a store, you're probably going to end up knowing more than the sales guy that you're talking to. And hopefully the information I give you is the kind of stuff that's just going to make it easier for you to make a really informed decision. So today's bike we're looking at, a 2025 Giant Talon 1. So we'll start off with obviously the visual. This is the first time you're seeing this bike, might be the first time you've seen this bike at all. This is one of 2 different colors available in the new Talon 1. This is obviously blue. The other color is charcoal. I haven't seen that one in person yet. This is our first shipment and the blue ones were the only ones that we got in the shipment. Weight on this bike, actually measured, it's a size large, 33.1 pounds. Price is $11.99 in Canada or $950 in the United States. For any of those who do quick math in their heads and know what the exchange rate is right now, we are getting an absolutely smoking deal on this in Canada because that $11.99 Canadian basically looks like about an 80-cent exchange rate on the $9.50 US dollar price. So we're getting a smoking deal in Canada on this bike. There are 6 different sizes in this bike. 5 actual sizes, extra small through extra large, but then size small is offered in 2 wheel sizes. You can get it in 27.5 or in 29 wheels. The extra small only available in 27.5. All the other bikes are available 29 only. That's medium, large, and extra large. This is a brand new frame. The previous Talon had basically been operating on just a switch of colors for a number of years previous, and this is quite a marked change. That is in geometry and in functional features that make this quite a bit better quality bike than what we're used to seeing in the Talon lineup. One other thing to note, all of the Talons, so in Canada we get the Talon 1, 2, and 4 maybe. All the Talons we're getting, all the Talons that are available in the States are a 1x drivetrain only. And also in the Giant lineup, the ARX has been removed. The ARX used to be the cheaper line of bikes than the Talon. So essentially there are no more front derailleurs in the adult mountain bike program for Giant. As I go through this video, I'll be showing you the details, describing all of the things that make this bike what I think to be a really good standout for value for the person who's looking for a daily use mountain bike that's mostly going to be just a daily rider, but that's going to also give you some features that's going to make it a really nice entry into actually riding on single track. This category of bike, this sort of first price point line of bikes being the Talon, I used to kind of jokingly refer to them as fat tired hybrids because I didn't think that they were that appropriate for actually mountain biking. Geometry, some of the dimensions of bits and pieces, quality of bits and pieces, none of those things stood up. This bike will actually give somebody a pretty excellent time to really give a good try on single track trails. So stick with me and I'm going to be going through all of the features that make this Giant Talon 1 stand out as quite an excellent value in 2025. So if you're short on time and you just want to know what the highlights are as far as the new changes, I will give those to you. I'm not going to pull the YouTuber, make you wait till the end to get the important stuff. I already told you the weight and the price, but the really important things that were updated on this bike are we now have a through axle on the rear end of the bike. We now have a dropper seat post, which is a really big standout for a $1,200 Canadian or $950 US bike. We now have a through axle on the forks, and we have a tapered head tube. So we have a whole number of things here that basically improve the way this bike is going to perform, and will also improve future upgrade ability for your bike. So if you don't want to listen to me ramble on about detailed specifications, now you know the highlights of why this Talon 1 is so special. For the rest of you actually looking to perhaps buy this bike and wanting to understand it better, we'll be going into detail now. So getting into some of the details on this bike, as mentioned earlier, 27.5 or 29 are the wheel size options, with 27.5 only being available in extra small and small, and then 29 being on small through extra large. I mentioned the fact that there are through axles on here. We also have an actual braze-on or a threaded insert here. That would be to put on either fenders or a rack. There is a really nice threaded hole up here, as well as one just behind the cranks. So you have the ability to mount fenders and or racks quite easily. We have, for an $1,199 bike, we actually have Maxxis tires, which is nice to see, and they're in a 29 by 2.4 size, so a good, proper, appropriate tire size. The rims, I would say, are a tad narrow. They're a 21 millimeter wide rim, so you're not going to be able to ride these tires exceptionally soft, which is a little bit of a shame, but I think probably appropriate at this price point. I didn't mention it before, it's an alloy frame on this bike. That is a really good thing when you're talking about Giant, because Giant does quite an excellent job when they make their Alux grade aluminum bikes. We have some really nice included chainstay protection that's going to help for when you're going over bumps and your chain is slapping against things. We have a 10-speed Shimano Q's derailleur on here. For those not in the know, Q's makes 9, 10, or 11-speed drivetrains, and at this level I would say that it's a pretty much direct crossover with a 10-speed Dior drivetrain. We have a clutch on here, that clutch just meaning that we have control over the spring in this part of the derailleur here, that when it's turned on we get a really pronounced spring tension, and that actually helps to control the chain from bouncing around too much. That both reduces the noise of your chain bouncing around. It also reduces the chance of your chain actually bouncing around on your cassette while you're riding, or of your chain bouncing off your front sprocket there. We have with this Link Drive or Link Glide cassette and chain and Q's derailleur, we have a really durable cassette and chain setup on here. This Link Glide that Shimano designed, as far as I can tell, was initially designed with the ideas of e-bikes, and then they saw how well it worked and they actually introduced it into the regular mountain bike program. The idea here is that the chain is a longer lasting chain than what we would traditionally see, and the cassettes themselves are a longer lasting. Shifting is really good on these. However, you do have really pronounced spots on the cassette that allow the chain to sort of rise and fall off of gears. So you do sometimes get a sense of a slightly delayed shift from one gear to the next compared to older Hyperglide systems. That through axle that I mentioned, that basically is going to mean that we get structural integrity of using the actual axle to tie both sides of your rear end of your frame together. So instead of your axle just stopping your rear wheel from basically falling off, the through axle now gives some extra torsional rigidity on there. Our cranks that we have here are a Pro Wheel crank, basically a no-name crank. Sizes on these are being modernized. The fact that we're looking at 170 cranks on even a size large. It only goes up to 175 on an extra large, and then 165s on extra small and small. Those are good modern lengths for cranks. Now, this is still working on a square taper system here. So the one thing I would advise is for somebody who really wants to smash their bike, jump it, stuff like that, square taper cranks and really aggressive use don't go together well. For regular usage, I think you're going to be more than happy with this setup. It's a threaded bottom bracket, so it's a pretty easy one. If down the road you actually want to switch out to a different crank set, you can spin out this cartridge, put in new cranks that are maybe a little bit more durable if you do want to be a little bit rougher on these things. Going together with that drivetrain, the 10-speed on the back, the single chainring on the front is using a narrow wide setup. It's a steel chainring, so it should last a long time. The narrow wide is basically helping you to get a really good chainring interface, so you're not going to have your chain bouncing off the front too easily. As mentioned at the beginning, there are no more front derailleurs on any of the Talons that are brought into North America, at least, and that I would say is a huge plus. I don't know if it was the fact that people knew that one buy was an option, but it seemed the last few years when we were selling bikes that even just had two chainrings on the front, there were a lot of people who were just less than happy with the performance of their front derailleur. So much more mountain bike appropriate, much more easy to operate, and with this range of gears, which goes from 11 to 48 teeth here, you're going to get basically enough range to basically go up and down most of the hills you would need to, and perhaps you'll miss out a little bit on your top speed going down a hill pedaling. On a mountain bike, I don't think that that is really something that is that important compared to a system that is now going to be lower maintenance and much easier for the rider. We have some changes to the frame shape. This is along lines of what we've seen from brands like Norco, Rocky Mountain over the last few years, putting a nice gusset in here, which helps us to get this virtually straight line for your top tube to seat stay sort of alignment. It's appealing on the eyes, very practical because it's getting us that much more standover height on the frame. The frame is quite slender in this area here, kind of flattened out. So if you do have to carry your bike or anything, it's still a pleasant enough feeling under your hands if you're holding it there. A couple water bottle mounts that we have, plenty for the average rider. And then, as I alluded to in the intro, a real standout on this bike is the fact that it is coming with a dropper seat post on here. A really, really nice improvement, where last year I think the cheapest bike that we were seeing with a dropper was about $1,500. We're now down to $1,200. And to give you an idea, all the sizes except for extra small and small have 120 or roughly a 5-inch dropper post. Once you're down into those smaller sizes, the extra small and small, you have 100 millimeters, so about 4 inches of drop. The saddle on here, this is one, it actually feels quite a bit when you're sitting on here, like some of the models from Ergon, which is a really good thing to hear. It's sort of a little bit more padded and a little bit more scooped, I think, compared to the Romero, which is a really popular saddle that comes on some of the higher end models from Giant. Geometry wise, this is another place that we've seen some quite good improvements. We have on our seat tube angle, we have 74.5 degrees. Now what that's going to do is basically help you to sit just a little further forward in the cockpit, so that when you're actually climbing hills in a mountain biking situation, it makes the bike feel a little bit less like it wants to do wheelies. Head tube angle, 67 or 67.5 degrees depending on the size. That is a really appropriate sort of an angle to give somebody a good confidence-inspiring feel without the bike feeling sort of wishy-washy and wanting to wander around too much. When we combine the actual frame reach with the fact that we're still looking at a little bit longer stems, especially as we get into the bigger bikes, we do have pretty good reach numbers on these bikes. I would say between the seat angle, the reach measurement on the frame, and the stem lengths, these are actually going to feel a little bit longer than some of the fancier bikes in the Giant lineup and from a lot of other companies. So keep that in mind. It'll feel a little bit more traditional, not quite as sit up with your hands so close to your knees when you're pedaling, which I think fits for a bike that's going to be used for riding around as much as it will be for mountain biking. As we get to the front end, we have these Giant forks. The one thing with this, I would say it's a little bit of a disappointment. The Giant forks in the past, at roughly this price level, we would have gotten into an alloy stanchioned fork with an air spring in there. On that though, we wouldn't have gotten the through axle. So in the name of durability, and I think in the name of a lot of people not really being into the sort of fine details of adjusting air spring on their forks, they've gone for simplicity, and with durability being their sort of design motive, I think, on this. Now it's a coil spring, but we do still have a lockout feature on here, and we still have, or we do have, a preload adjustment over here. I wouldn't rely on that too much. That's essentially just putting a little bit of extra tension on the spring in the fork to make it feel a touch firmer or softer just off the top of the stroke. Now I spotted something as I was just looking at all the specs, and that is the handlebar specs that Giant put on the website. They say that all the bikes are supposed to get 690 millimeter handlebars, which I was ready to criticize for being yesterday's news and not really appropriate for a bike that is otherwise more capable than what a 690 millimeter handlebar should be offered with. So I was very happy to see, and I measured 2 different sizes in this bike and a couple in one of the cheaper Talons, and they're all coming with 780 millimeter wide handlebars. So don't pay attention then to the Giant specs, because they, as far as I can tell, are probably wrong across the board. What that's going to mean for you, the width and the fact that I really like the fact that it's got wider handlebars, is A, if you don't like wider, much easier to chop them down than it is to add width. Also, this bike is going to feel quite stable and quite able to go pretty quickly in some pretty bumpy terrain. If you've got narrow handlebars, you basically don't have the mechanical advantage over your front wheel to make sure that you're controlling the front wheel instead of your front wheel controlling you. So wider handlebars when we're into modern geometries, an important thing. I would say, as we're talking about the handlebars, these grips, once again, a grip that I personally detest from Giant. I think they feel absolutely terrible underhand. They feel kind of squirmy, while at the same time I think you would have blisters within an hour of riding this bike. So if you get a chance, you buy this bike, I would take those grips, I would toss them in the garbage, walk over to your local bike shop, look at their grip selection, and get something that looks better, feels better, and will actually mechanically lock onto your handlebars, so you don't end up with the dangerous situation of your grips spinning if you ever get water or dirt underneath them. Another thing that I would consider as far as an upgrade, I would personally, if I was buying this bike, I would be buying a size large. I'm about 6'1", and I would actually go from this 70 millimeter long stem, and I would probably size down to a 40 or 50 millimeter long stem. I think that that's actually going to improve the ride quality of this bike. But that is because I come from a very serious mountain biking background. But just a suggestion for you, if you're going to be mountain biking, a shorter stem will make this bike probably feel a little bit more confidence inspiring and leave your weight able to go back a little bit further when you're dealing with some steeper descents. Circling around, we're looking at the brake levers. This is the standard Tektro entry-level hydraulic disc brake. It isn't the best feeling brake in the world as far as it's very on-off, but we have now been selling bikes with these brakes for years, and for being an entry-level brake, these are probably more reliable than even a 5-year-old fairly high-end brake. The braking power, not massive, better than mechanical, but good brakes, reliable. You can get a little bit of improved braking performance out of these if you just put in Shimano brake pads. Those Tektro calipers can take standard Shimano brake pads, which tend to have a nicer feel and maybe a little bit more modulation and bite. We'll just show you a couple more of the details here. We have some nice ports for the cables to go into the internal rooted down tube routing there. We no longer have the big ugly rubber plugs that would have sat around the cables, which were always popping out and basically just making things look unsightly. We actually have guides within the frame that help to sort of send the cables into the frame at a nice angle. A very nice touch. If we're looking directly at this head tube, we now finally have an actual tapered head tube on this bike. This is a big deal if you happen to fall in love with your Talon so much that you actually want to start upgrading things. Aftermarket forks almost don't exist in non-tapered, or at least ones that would be considered an upgrade. So now with a tapered steer tube, you can put in a tapered fork, and world is your oyster for the number of options that you can actually change your forks to. I should mention on this bike, we're dealing with 100 millimeters of suspension on here in the size extra small and small. In the 27.5 version, it goes down to an 80 millimeter travel fork, if I remember correctly. Yeah, which is basically done to help lower the entire top tube of the bike to make those extra smalls and smalls in the 27.5 version a little bit better standover. That's a place that maybe I would have liked to have seen a 120 millimeter fork to sort of increase capability just a little bit, but I really don't think that it's a huge standout. I think the through axle, the toughness that that provides, these relatively thick stanchioned steel stanchions on here, this is a little bit more about durability and realizing that at this price point, sort of fine-tuning or little things like an extra 20 millimeters of fork suspension are maybe not as important to Giant as keeping the price on this as reasonable as possible. Now, I touched on a couple things as far as the grips, the stem length that I would upgrade. I would also, if I was buying this bike, upgrade these plastic pedals. The pedals that you're getting on a lot of bikes at these sort of price points tend not to have great bearings. These actually don't feel nearly as bad as many, but I would say that for around town use, these plastic pedals with just sort of plastic blobs on here for traction, that is an all right around town thing. But if you actually went mountain biking, I think you're going to want to have something that at least has some steel traction pins to make sure your feet aren't just sliding off the pedals. Another thing I would also mention is the dropper seat post that they put on here. It's awesome that they put a dropper on, but it is an unusual dropper because most droppers these days, if you buy aftermarket, you basically have the ability to set your dropper anywhere within this 120 millimeters of drop range. This is the first time I think I've seen on a modern dropper that you basically have two heights. When you press your button, it's either going to be sprung to the top or you sit down and it sticks at the bottom, but you can't get your dropper to sort of stick anywhere in this in-between zone. So just a thing to note. Love the fact that there's a dropper on here, but that is a little bit of an unusual feature, only being able to ride your seat at top or bottom height. Related to the dropper and not wanting to miss out on things like this, the dropper remote, it's got a decent feel as far as being an under the bar thumb lever, but there's a lot of plastic in this sort of stuff, and I feel like I won't be surprised if we see the occasional person in here who has crashed or something and broken something to do with this. There's a little bit of flex in there. Not super excited about that quality. Once again, we're talking price point, and this is what we get when we've got a $1,200 bike that's added some features that as an aftermarket thing are basically worth about $300. Just heading back around, 160 millimeter rotors, front and rear, I believe, on here. Actually, no, it says they are 180s on the front. That's pretty appropriate for this sort of a bike. And I think that rounds out you now knowing all of the features on this bike. It's the 2025 blue Talon 1 29er. This was the size large, a 33.1 pound bike. An exceptional deal in Canada at $1,200. A really good deal in Canada at $950. And come drop by, talk to us, or visit your local Giant dealer if this bike interests you. Thanks again for watching, and like and subscribe if you love learning about bikes.